Welcome back to another edition of the Urban Guru Podcast, where we feature creative insights from artists of color. Today, we feature J.P. Jackson of J.P. Jackson Art. He's going to talk about his journey to being a comic book artist, a cover artist, and a writer, all while avoiding the daily 9-to-5 grind that so many of us find ourselves in. So stay tuned for this very informative and enjoyable conversation.
Thank you for doing the interview.
Of course, no problem. Thank you for having me here today.
Nice. Because one of the things I really like to do is I like to talk to creative people, particularly creative people of color, and just get where they're coming from, talk about some of the issues that they have to deal with and things like that, and hopefully it'll kind of inspire other people.
Awesome.
And that's why I have to say I was looking at your website again. And I like your statement at the bottom. It's important that I bring you all diverse content that puts a fresh spin on familiar stories and characters. And I hope this work inspires you and allows you to look at the world differently. And I can say, oh, I really like that.
Thank you.
So
someone's reading. Someone actually read that at the bottom. It's amazing. Oh, that makes me glad. That makes me feel good and say, awesome.
How do you like people to refer to you? As an artist, as a writer, as a comic book artist?
I'm so used to being an artist for so long. I just take artist. I'm fine with being referred to as Jordan the artist. But as of lately, I find myself getting more into writing. And I might have been secretly a writer, a bad or good writer, whatever, at heart for a long time. Just because I started out. My journey started out when I was in middle school. I actually went to school for drawing. And so over time, when I went to high school, I started to get into oil painting. And that's when I was just I was doing a lot of paintings of me and building these backstories behind it related to science fiction and robots. So I was always fighting a robot or something, or dealing with some technological dilemma, being overwhelmed by being overwhelmed by technology. And so I started noticing I have this and this all comes back from me watching animation, watching Saturday morning cartoons. And so I noticed how I'm clearly trying to tell specific stories and message even in my paintings. And so that ultimately turned into animation when I went to college. And so I enjoyed storytelling through animation. That was my thing at the time. And I always enjoyed film, so a lot of film references and things would always get into my work. And then towards the end, in my senior year, I did a thesis project called Land of the Wolves. That was my 4-minute short, and I did 3 minutes. I did 3 shorts every year when I was in college. So I would do a short each year, and I wasn't supposed to. They were like, this is a lot for a freshman. I'm like, I'll do a 5-minute long animation. It looks bad, but I did it. So every year I found myself developing a new project, a new short. And so, but when I got to my thesis, I'm like, all right, I've done this for 2 years straight, 3 years straight. So it's now time to crack down and actually learn how to refine storytelling. And so towards the end of that process, I randomly decided to write a comic book, a prequel story. That was strictly visuals. There's no image, no lettering really. And I wanted to do something additive to the animation. And so I got out of college and tried to kind of figure my way around life. I got a normal job, quote unquote normal job. And I was doing freelance work and doing animation on the side, but I still had this fire to tell stories. And I'm I don't know how this animation stuff's going to work with me wanting to tell my own stories. And so a friend of one of my best friend and his cousin and his cousin's best friend, we came together to pitch a TV show. And my best friend's cousin needed artists. So me and my best friend, both artists. So we came together, we developed the artwork for a pitch. And then they said, hey, come to Harlem and stay up here. And we're going to go to the Black Comic Book Festival in Schaumburg. And this is 2017. And I go there and I'm anxious. I don't know what to expect, but I walk in there and I'm like, oh, wow, this is this is literally like home. Like this is a space of like Black comic book creators. And I had no clue this existed. I literally for years, and I'm ashamed of this, but I'm gonna be honest, for a long time, like I didn't really pay attention to like I didn't focus on like Black voices or Black creators within the comic book world. I was mostly interested in animation and painting for a long time. So I was like, let me find Black people paint. Let me find, find stories that are told by Black animators, or at least show us. But I never really like dove into comics, although they've been there in my life, like the
Hmm.
mainstream stuff. And so going to the Schomburg was just like, this is where I need to be. And so I started meeting various creatives. Like I met the creator of Black, Kwanzaa,
Mm.
met him. I met the creator is Nana the Were Spider, Greg Elise Anderson. And from that point, those like two people kind of stuck out to me. And so I was like, I got to see like how as Black creators we could tell our own stories. And from then on, I was just like, this is it. Like this is where I need, this is my purpose. And so from then on, I set forth to do comic books. And it didn't take me till 3 years for me to finally get into selling work and vending. And I think or 2 years, it was 2019.
Hmm.
And so I started vending, and then I met a friend, a current client, Rod Van Blake, and he hired me to take his series Ancient Illumination and turn it into a graphic novel. And so that was just like, oh, I get paid to do this. And like this is amazing. And it's a different experience because it's almost like I'm a director.
Hmm.
My animation experience is coming back because I'm like, he gives me free reign to kind of craft a story in a certain way, and I can visualize it. Boom, put this here, move scenes around. Boom, to tell a different story. And it's this. That's kind of like that's my part of my process. Well, specifically working with him though. But and then after that, I worked on another project called Jericho's Bane, working with another writer, Black
Hmm.
writer, Arrow J. Knight. And then from then, 2 years from 2019, I finally released my own book. I wrote it, everything myself, drew everything myself, lettered everything myself, formatted everything. And so that was all kind of a learning process. It's always, so
Yeah.
I'm constantly learning something new.
Yeah, and I'll say that I met you at the same time I met the other two authors that you mentioned at BlurredCon
Mm-hmm.
here in
Yep.
Washington, D.C. And I have the first issue of your book. It's a very in-depth book. It's very nice. It's very visual. The atmosphere and stuff is fantastic. And you can tell the deep lore of writing stories and setting up worlds. Because when you read your book, you can tell that there's a backstory. There's stuff there. There's material there.
Okay.
So that's
Thank you.
that's really nice. So it really comes through. So I was going to say, it sounds like for you, going all the way back to when you first started, it was almost like a holistic type of approach for you. You're doing the animation, then you realize you need story to go with it,
Mm-hmm.
or you create the story to go with it. Have you always approached your artwork or your writing that way? Do you see like a whole picture and then you just pull in the other elements because you need them?
Sometimes it's like sometimes I do have this full image of what I want, and then I'll just go in and add something just to
Hmm.
give it a little, just to give something more. Like it's like, for instance, my thesis, it started out as a short film. That was the goal, was to do this short film.
Hmm.
And toward the end, I think it was for a class. I think that was what for a class assignment, I added on, I try to reconnect things through comic books. But now, and even when I would do paintings, we were always given a prompt or something to work off of, but I would create my own story to go with
Hmm.
that painting. And that was just all me. Um, and now going like focusing exclusive in comics, it's like thinking about, I'm always thinking about like how, like I have a main story, but also I'm creating a kind of like spin-off story that kind of connects back to the main story. And then thinking about how do I create animations to go with this comic book? How do I create
Hmm.
artwork to go? So it becomes a whole entire package now.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting thing that you say, because when I listen to you talk, you mentioned being a director, but it also sounds like you're a producer because you're talking about an entire package. And
I guess
typically,
so.
Yeah, and, when I came up here to DC to go to graduate film school, and one of the things
Hmm.
that I always tell people, I wanted to be a producer because everybody wanted to be a director. They wanted to be the next
Hmm.
Spike Lee or Hudlin or whatever, whoever was the one that was the
Hmm.
popular one at the time. And I'd always say I wanted to be a producer, and they say, well, what's a producer? And it's like, well, producer is the one who hires the director. They're the one
Hmm.
who shepherds the entire concept from start to finish. You know, their job isn't over until it's out to the public. And so just
Right.
listening to you and the journey that you went through, it's like it feels like you're doing all of these different elements and you're bringing them together so that you can put your product out and you can get your things out. So it really sounds like you have a producer spirit inside
That's what
of
it is. I'm always like, it's the artist spirit. It's got to be that. I don't know, but
you.
I don't. It's all. It's just everything. I don't know. So it's so encompassing.
How are you in terms of interacting with the public, with your audience and things like that?
So I find myself doing better at in-person
Mhm,
events and conventions. It's it's kind of it's easier for me to kind of talk to people and like be kind of charming and charismatic and kind of
mhm,
interesting in that way in person. But I still haven't like mastered the art of like online marketing, like
mhm,
having that type of like business strategy.
mhm,
I still haven't figured out how to kind of like create that branding element, that uniqueness.
mhm,
But I mean, I'm great with kind of connecting with people. Period.
mhm,
I have the ability to do that. Um, just through like I'm more of like a conversation person, so I'm more like I like to build connection with people with conversation,
mhm.
and so that works well on the internet. I try to connect. I try to connect with my certain followers, and and kind of cultivate real experience, real human connection. Although we've never met, so I try my best. So.
So for you, you talked a little bit about how your journey began. You mentioned that you actually high school or before you went
Middle
to a school,
school,
middle
middle
school. So you
school,
went
yeah.
to, was it like a magnet school or a charter
Yes,
school?
yes. I went to a
Okay.
magnet school, and I had to test to get in that,
Mhm.
and I was the artist guy. I drew stuff. That was
I
my
mean, did
thing.
you know that going in, or they test you and they say, okay, and you realized
Oh
through
no,
the
that's what I
testing?
wanted to do. Middle school was magnet, high school was magnet.
Mhm,
And that one I specifically chose. I think I specifically chose painting when I was in high school. That was what I wanted to do. But I also did. I had to do everything as well. Like they made us, and that probably is why I'm like this. But we had to
mhm,
learn film. We had to learn digital art. We had to learn photography. Learn sculpture.
mhm,
And so I
mhm.
went to it's George Washington Carver Center for Arts and Technology. It's in Towson, um, in Maryland, and so Baltimore. And so I had to learn all those things. And so I'm like, oh, I'm not, it was kind of creating. It was kind of creating this atmosphere where like I had access to so many different things, and
Mhm.
I could like touch upon that, use that, and it was always kind of a fun experience.
So you got hired to help pitch a show. Whatever became of that?
It didn't go anywhere, but the writer, one of the writers, he's still kind of like working on like establish connections and trying to kind of like still get it adapted and picked up. So it's
Um,
still working.
and what kind of show? I mean, it was a pitch for an animated show
Yes, it
itself.
was for an animated show. It would have been a
Mhm.
comedy. I actually can't talk about
You
it.
can't talk about it
I can't
yet.
talk. All I can say it's a comedy and it was historical. That's all I'm going to say.
Historical. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit. You talked about your love of art from a very early age. What about any inspirations for you? Were there inspirations that and I know you mentioned some, but
Mhm.
were there other inspirations for you?
So I think I like to highlight the more recent inspirations just because they
Mhm,
become so kind of prevalent in my work. So um, I always film wise, I've always been inspired by Blade Runner, anime wise, Ghost in the Shell, and Akira, and uh, Miyazaki's Princess Mononoke. Um,
mm.
I've always been drawn to like the darker anime and like like those styles, Cowboy Bebop, those type
Oh,
of styles. I've always been like my thing, and so
mhm,
I've kind of carried those with me. And then when I kind of got more into the comic book space, um, a lot of people were like pointing me in directions to different Black creators, and I'm just looking at work. And
Mhm.
I was really drawn to Sanford Green's work. Um, and his work has always been very gestural. Like I
Mhm.
love how like he draws figures. Like the line work isn't perfectly clean, but it has like
Mhm.
this kind of painter look to it.
Okay.
Brian Stillfreeze and Sean Damian Hill. He does. He's a more realist. He's a more realist when it comes to comics. And I
Mhm.
like, oh, I love this. I love this. If I just had time, I love this. Um, and writing wise, for my writers, um, who else? We got David F. Walker. He did Bitterroot and The Hated, I think. Um, TJ Sterling, he has Okemos, and he has a new series called Joystick Angels. So those are kind of like
Mhm.
the writers and the artists that I'm kind of looking at right now.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I've had a chance to meet TJ Sterling also. He actually worked at Marvel for a time
Yeah, yeah, I heard
before
about
he
that.
came out. He did his own thing. So I'm just so as somebody like that, even from a business standpoint, is that kind of like an inspiration that you might be looking?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's
Hmm.
I kind of like that's I kind of look at like him, my friend Rod and
Hmm.
Arrow J Knight. Like I look at how they kind of treat themselves as business entrepreneurs and how they kind of brand themselves, promote themselves, and I'm like, this is something I should study. This is this is my weakness. And I should try to figure this out, or pay someone to do it. If money is there, pay someone to do the promo stuff. I don't know. It's difficult at times trying to be the artist, the
Mhm.
producer, as you say, the producer, director, and
Yeah.
also be the marketing person, project
Yeah.
manager, all
Mhm.
that.
Yeah. And branding is one of those interesting things. We were talking about uh, somebody that we mutually know before we started this. And one of the things that I want to talk to that particular artist entrepreneur about is how he went about doing his
Mm-hmm.
branding, how he gets all his things together and how he promotes himself and the campaigns and things like that. Because I've taken some cues from him in terms of mailing campaigns and things like that. So those are some of the topics that I like to really talk about with creative people and see what they are doing, and how are they getting out there, because hopefully this will inspire other people and maybe give them some few tips so that they don't
All right.
hit some of the roadblocks that sometimes we have to go through when we're doing this. You mentioned some writers. Are you contemplating doing any straight up writing?
Oh no. No, never. I should be like never. No,
Mhm.
I respect you writers for what you do.
Mhm.
That is not for me. That is strictly writing's not for me. I need the whole pack. I need the visual medium and the words.
Mhm.
But I completely respect the writing art form.
Mhm.
Y'all are amazing. And can do some amazing things. And I think
Mhm.
the power in what y'all do as writers is like allowing the reader to imagine.
Mhm.
That's always the fun part. And that's part of the process I enjoy, like working with Rod, is like I could read his book and I'm like, boy, let me do this. And I'm like, this is gonna be nice. And it's like I get really excited. And it's like I'm the reader, but I'm also the producer, all these other things, and it's
Mhm.
kind of just like a really fun process. So I'm like, I'm gonna leave that one to y'all. Y'all do the writing, do that. I draw the pictures and I write a little bit.
Mhm. Well, let's circle back and talk about the writing that you actually do when it
Okay.
comes to your story. Um, Take us through that process just a little bit. I mean, what is the process of writing for you as a comic book artist?
So for me, this is this is like this weird collage of processes, but it started out first with like because in college, I took a creative writing class. I realized that like my brain naturally was kind of better at like I had to write my story out kind of like a short story,
Mm,
and
mhm,
just take it from there.
mhm,
I would start there. Like when I first wrote the Eve of Insurrection, I wrote it as a short story to get the idea out my head, and then I worked it a bit to transform it into a script. and I would just like pop in dialogue and then kind of like did research on formatting, how to format a script for like like a professional script like screenwriting.
Mhm.
Um, but generally, I all the process, I have the idea, I have the inspiration, and then like I try to base my stories in reality. So I try to pull from experiences, pull from history in some ways, or reference something that's very real.
Mhm.
Um, and so I kind of take from that, and then I just bog down. I um I build out the world. I take that approach. I build out the world first. I try to
Mhm.
figure out my limitations, and I really had to um crack down on that, just because like I noticed like first time writing, I was like, I'm gonna make all these gangs and vigilante groups and all these people with different ideologies, and I'm like, Jordan, slow down. Um, and I it was David I had was in a clubhouse with David F. Walker, and he kind of suggested like to really focus, like what is the real story, like focus on
Mhm. Mhm.
the story that you really want to tell. And I realized having 10 gangs was irrelevant. um and so that helped me limit myself and kind of focus in. But from there, I do the outlining. I do I do outlining, and then I go and kind of transform into a script. So my process is getting better. Um, but I noticed with this new project, this new short story spinoff, my brain was kind of struggling with like properly visualizing everything, but also trying to kind of tell the story in a clear and concise way. So I found myself kind of moving between like actually thumbnailing out the story and then going back to the script to change and fine tune things, because I could actually set the pacing from a visual standpoint.
Mhm.
And it kind of, and also when I draw, sometimes I like come up with new stuff, and then I'll be like, how can I tailor the dialogue to reflect like something that I've drawn?
Mhm.
It felt very different. I'm like, I'm doing something weird, but I'm going to go with it because this kind of feel like it feels right for me specifically, because I'm like, I get inspiration from different things. So if I draw a character who's like I may write or outline a scene that says like this person is going to fight this person,
Mhm.
but when I'm drawing it out, I start coming up with new details. Like
Mhm.
this person may fall into some specific item that has some significance, and then I would think like how can I write, like what am I going to do dialogue to reflect what's happening? And so ideas kind of come
Mhm.
to me sometimes.
I'm always amazed that creativity is creativity,
Mm-hmm.
no
Yep.
matter what medium or form that you're using. And what you're saying is the exact same thing that happened to writers.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to be more of at the very least, an outliner. I have my big
Okay.
idea, I at least outline it. But then when I start writing, it's just like you say, once you get into the middle of those scenes and those characters start speaking, things change a little bit and
Mm-hmm.
things change around. So it's the same process that we go through. Just listen to what you were saying about sometimes you might draw a cell or something and then you go back and change the script. That happens to me. Like I said, I'm an editor, but I'm also a very audio. I get inspiration from audio, music.
Okay.
So if
Nice.
I'm doing something, say for a client, a lot of times I know what I have to do. I might even gone out and shot everything,
Mm-hmm.
but before I put it together, I'll sit down and spend an entire day looking for the right piece of music. And when it
Mm.
hits me and inspires me, and now I start shaping all this stuff I have, going back and forth that way. I was just listening to an interview by Hans Zimmer, who did the music for the latest Dune movie.
Yep.
And they were talking with the sound audio people, and they was talking about how the sounds they came up with then went back and informed what the animators did for the
Ooh.
movie.
Yep.
So they were going back and forth,
That's
just like you
nice.
said. So it seems like creativity has this give and take flow that creative people naturally, when they dip into the flow, it's the same no matter where they are, no matter what level they are. It tends to kind of come across the same. So yeah, it's that's nice. It's nice. So yeah, that give and take I think is pretty consistent. But in terms of comic books, are there iconic comic books that inspire you?
Initially, I tried to read The Watchmen. I was like, I'm gonna do it. Got through probably a good 40 pages. So I'm like, this is a bulk read. This was in the early days of just like me being like trying to figure out the comic book world. I'm like, I do want to read this. Like, I want to read this.
Mhm.
Um, but like I've tried to give that a read, and like I saw panels, and I'm like, I see why, like from storytelling perspective, this is iconic. And then as time went on, I found this book written by Alejandro Jodorowsky called Meta Baron,
Mhm.
and it was super dated, like very just it was clearly from the 70s, a lot of violence, a lot of sex, and I'm like, oh, what's happening here? But from a visual perspective, it
Mhm.
was very interesting. It was very much like hand painted, very beautiful. And it kind of tells. It was interesting to watch a read in it. It was almost a compendium
Mhm.
that kind of shows this kind of patriarchal lineage of like these fathers and sons that are forced to be that have to kind of transfer their power to their sons, and kind of
Mhm.
carry the mantle of this powerful dude named the Meta Baron. It was like a thing. So like I read that, I'm like, wow, like this is very visually interesting. Needed a little update, story wise, but that was something that really kind of clicked with me. Just clicked with me from a visual perspective. And then I think writing wise, like recently, like I got into Rodney Barnes' Philadelphia, and like that's kind of like where I want to be as like a creator, where like I'm able to tell these science fiction fantasy stories that ground you in like ground you in real world experience. That one's very grounded in reality. Um, but it's still like that one is always just like it points like it kind of deals with vampires and looking at the history of vampires in America.
Mhm.
And you have these kind of the issues of racism and all these different aspects. Um, but
Within the vampire community.
yeah, I think there's more. I mean, you get these glimpses and just the reality. Like there's these kind of touches upon police brutality that happen.
Mhm.
But the I don't when I read it, I don't think at least the first issue that I got into. I don't want to spoil anything, but they had black vampires, so there was no. I didn't get no racist vibes like, oh, they treat the black vampires differently. No, it wasn't that. They were like a hive. So, but there was some hierarchy to them as well. There
Mhm.
was. You always have your the vampire. They created everybody, so you always got that guy, but there was
The
some
alpha.
hierarchy. Yeah, there's some hierarchy, but they kind of get into the history, but then how that plays into America.
Mhm.
So I'm not going to talk about it anymore. But that one's very interesting to me right now, because it just deviates from like the superhero stuff, because I'm not I love superheroes, but writing wise, I've never been interested in writing like a superhero per se.
Yeah. Mhm.
Per se, because our character is technically a
Mhm.
vigilante, but we'll get into that.
Yeah. Real quick, you mentioned that you like Blade Runner.
Yes.
Which one?
Really gonna sit here and say I mean the original one with Harrison Ford, or
The original.
the
Okay.
original one, not 2049, the last one that just came out
Mhm.
with Ryan Gosling. That one was
Mhm.
just visual eye candy, cyberpunk
Mhm.
eye candy.
Mhm.
Mm, wasn't doing it for me.
You like the story. It's always the story that
But
appeals to
for
you.
me, Blade Runner, like the original Blade Runner, I felt like Harrison Ford's character really kind of like, I mean, he was that kind of like detective-y cop, like in your noir story. He was just solving a mystery.
Mhm.
And although the newest one is still kind of like, it follows in the vein of Ryan Gosling's character has to solve a mystery.
Mhm.
It didn't feel like it wasn't enticing me as much. It wasn't evolve. Didn't feel like much of an evolution. That's really what it was. It didn't
Mhm.
evolve or open and push the envelope.
You know what Afrofuturism is,
Yes.
right? And it feels to me that when it comes to your stories, that's a key part of taking that technology, pushing it into the future, and then how does
Yep.
it interact with our community? And it seems like even when you talk about the original Blade Runner, I think that was one of the, not the Afrofuturism, but the mix of technology and where it's taken us,
Yes.
and the replicants and what does that
Yep.
mean? And
Yep.
even if he's even a replicant, and then the technology to detect them, the technology is a key part of it,
Hmm.
and how we're going to deal with it in the future with corporations controlling everything. So I guess for you, do you see Afrofuturism as just a natural part of what you do and your storytelling?
Yes. I think just the ability to kind of imagine like black people in the future and imagine where we take things has always been there. Since I told you, like, I used to draw myself fighting robots. I didn't even know that technically would have been Afrofuturistic. But I've always just been super into science fiction. But it's very important that, like, I've kind of reflected on this more, but it's even outside of like the science fiction, heavy science fiction, I think it's important that we touch upon our history in religion, like in spirit and spirituality. And I
Mhm.
think that there is room for that in Afrofuturism, and like all these worlds can be blended in it, but they all express the same thing of
Mhm.
a black future. And I was kind of seeing that future.
Mhm. And having a place in that future.
Exactly, exactly. Controlling that future, being agents, having agency.
Agent. There you go, agency. So I was looking at your cover for Land of the Wolves,
Mhm.
and I was going to ask you, do you think your stories tend to be a little bit dystopian in outlook?
Yes, I'm a little dark. Yeah, and that's always the thing. It's like I find that, like, as a creative writer, creator, director, producer, like I've always been drawn to that kind of dystopian
Mhm,
nature, just dystopian setting, be a
mhm,
dystopian setting, in just the conflicts that kind of arise.
mhm.
I enjoy a conflict in the story. So
Yeah, and I also noticed again because it looks really interesting, and I want to get Land of the Wolves. I of course I have your first issue of Eva's Insurrection,
mhm.
and it's interesting when it comes down to the sexes, and it seems that you place Black females at the center of your stories.
Yes, oh, you caught me. Um, it's it's like weird, like it's not weird, it's just like it's always been a thing for me because I feel like black women aren't shown in they're properly represented or even
Mhm,
shown in science fiction worlds. And so, like, in Land of the Wolves, my main character, she's a mixed race character. And so she kind of deals with like the kind of like identity. Well, she at this point, she's not really dealing with her identity of like who she is, like in the sense of like I am black and I am Latinx. It's more
mhm,
of I am a shaman and what am I supposed to do with this power? And how can I
mhm,
help people? Am I
mhm,
doing the right thing? But I thought it was important to give more nuance to
mhm,
these black women in this kind of science fiction and fantasy world. And so that comes back up. And then for Eve of Insurrection, I thought it was very important. I'm like, I want there to be a black woman in a cyberpunk world, and she's gonna fight crime, and she's gonna start a revolution. She's gonna be head of the Black Panther Party in the future, and you're not gonna tell me anything else. And she's gonna punch people. She's gonna be Batman, and she's gonna be Batman. She's gonna demand vengeance, and and so, like, also I've been a Batman. Also, I'm a big fan of Batman. So like as I've grown older, I've like gone into these discussions about like, is Batman, is he really helping society? He's rich, but there's still poverty. He's fighting crime for what?
mhm,
And it's like I feel like Eve of Insurrection was my answer to that, where you have black people who are in power that have used their wealth and power to create utopias or just like better systems for us to live in. But they
mhm,
also have to go out, fight capitalism, because not everyone has agreed to this system. And so I thought that was important to have a black woman doing it, or a lineage, a generation of black women doing
mhm.
that, because that's more giving y'all more nuggets that kind of happen in the Eve of Insurrection world. But yes, it's a generational kind of
Yeah.
fight. Yeah.
So I guess you kind of talked about your inspiration for Eve of Insurrection. It comes from, like you said, you're delving more into the Batman and asking those essential
Yes.
questions.
Yeah.
Is he really helping? Where is he coming from?
Hmm.
And so, yeah, and like I said, when you read Eve of Insurrection, you can see the layers there.
Okay, that's good.
You can feel the
Yeah.
world there.
Yeah. That's thank you. I appreciate that. And the main character, I gotta highlight this. The main character is actually Lana Baker. She's based off. Yes, the Shadow Queen is a reference to Batman. This dual identity is a reference to Batman, but but Lana is kind of an amalgamation of like three Black women that have been just very interesting me on a part, like very amazing people. And so I gotta shout out my fiance. She's one person that's inspired the character, and it's just like I bring up the duality of just like kind of existing in this world, and like you may have to like go into a corporate space, and you have to you can't move the same if
Mhm.
we're moving with a Black space, Black community. And so those elements play in. um and then one of my friends, who's a professor and a filmmaker, named Kayla Watkins, and she was another inspiration because she was very into activism, and doing a lot of things in Philadelphia. In a big part of my story, or at least my character's journey, Lana's journey, is questioning whether or not what she's doing is working, and whether or not she is. And then there's the overarching kind of issue of like how about putting all yourself into a cause, and like what happens when you're lost, when you no longer have enough energy to fight. How do you recharge? Like, what does
Mhm.
that mean? And so those questions became very pertinent. And then there was a woman in South Africa who I met through Instagram. Her name's Vanessa Lilly. She has a organization called Queen's Goal, and basically she kind of helps give resources, teaching young women in South Africa, just empowering them. And I
Mhm.
thought that all these elements are very important to me, that like Black women need to continue to see this, and like,
Mhm.
and that needs to be highlighted. So
Mhm.
that was those women inspired this character. So
And it definitely comes out
mhm.
in the comic book, and we certainly urge everybody to go out and get a copy of it,
Thank
of
you.
course.
Thank you, please.
But even when you first meet your character, she's talking to the younger woman,
Mhm.
the student, and the care and the familiarity and the sense of community that's there and looking out. So you're right. You take her through all those different levels, even when she's in her suit and stuff,
Mhm.
she's still rescuing in a way.
And it's always interesting because like as a creator, like we always have to find a way to put yourself,
Mhm.
even like myself, into the character. And like I find that like I myself I have this ability to want to help people. Like I want to be able to help. Like if I like it's just a thing. My dad taught me like help, just help people, be there for the people you love and care about. So it's like kind of like I put that
Mhm.
into my character, where it's like, but it's almost this problem where she's pushing herself a little too hard to help everyone. So those are some things I kind of want to talk about. So,
Mhm.
yep.
How does Eve of Insurrection start? What's the first chapter? Just tell the people.
Okay. So the first chapter follows our main character, Lana Baker, as she's trying to do her day job of helping the world, helping other communities that don't have the best resources,
Mhm.
and she's kind of giving back to the community. And so, but on top of that, at night, or in this underground world at night, she fights crime, and she's basically she solves mysteries. And so she's going around trying to solve this particular mystery of some missing
Mhm.
boys.
Mhm.
And so she kind of has to go through that journey, and that's what we'll see play out in the first 2 or 3 issues. Like this is all going to become a concurrent thing, and then there'll be more elements brought in
Mhm.
to unpack the conspiracy. It's always a
And
conspiracy.
so how many issues do you think will be in this run?
It'll be seven.
7? Okay,
Seven, yes.
cool. You have all those storyboarded out and
I
outlined?
have outlined. Actually, I do. I just had a series outline, so I know what's happening in each issue.
Mhm.
But the thing is, like, after I did issue one, I went into issue two, and I just like wrote a note because I wanted to have like I've been struggling to figure out how I want to open up the first book.
Mhm.
Do I want to get more into media representation? Because that's another thing I want to talk about in the series, just like how the media portrays Lana, um, as how do they kind of portray the Shadow Queen, and like
Mhm.
how does the media spin this image of this black woman, how they rob
Mhm.
black women of their agency, or
Mhm.
how they kind of turn them into monsters or turn them into masculine, make them masculine, rob them of their femininity. So there's things I'm debating about how to start the next book, but and kind of talking about in other issues, but
And that's interesting that you mentioned the media, because I
Mhm.
read through the first issue that you gave, that I bought a few times. And I think it was the second time that I really picked up on on the media commentary and framing of what was going on.
Yep.
How they tried to say one thing, but it is interesting. And again, people have to get the book to see it. You have what the media, how the media frames it, but
Yes.
then you're taking us through what's happening. So it
Yeah, you're
gives
getting
the
that full
reader,
time. You're getting
yeah.
that consistent full time. Hey, this is what actually happens, and then the media
Uh-huh.
shows up at the end, but like, ha, this is hey
Yeah.
America, hey everybody, this is where we're giving you real news. Yeah, sure.
Basically, it seems to me what you're talking about is maybe something like code switching,
Yes. Yeah.
which is what, again, if for a lot of us who have to go to our day job, typically for most of us, our day
I gotta
job,
salute y'all for that one.
yeah. Well, like I said,
I
I
have to. It's like it's just like it's such a hard I work like I had a I had a day job for previous to COVID, and it was just like ugh, it was rough. And I didn't work in a corporate world, but I mean I worked in art, and like we had to deal with
Mhm,
Google, like bigger clients, which are aspects
mhm.
of corporate world. And I it wasn't a good feeling. It was like being at a human zoo. It wasn't fun. It wasn't a good experience.
How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 28. Just turned 28 2 days ago. 28.
Oh, you're still a youngin.
Yeah, I'm still young. I'm still
I will
young.
say this because of COVID, and also I think because of where people of your generation are coming from, it seems like y'all are less able to deal with the bullshit, basically.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm starting to learn. But like, too emotional, young people.
I don't
And I
know.
get it. I don't. I think my young spirit belief is that like it comes from a place of like
Mm,
we had to we've inherited this probably through our DNA, but it's like
mhm,
we had to also see our ancestors go through all this shit, this
mhm.
disrespect, excuse my language, this disrespect. And it's kind of like I feel like we're at the point where it's like we're not going to take this, like
Yeah,
y'all going to pay us what we're worth and respect us, um and
yeah,
then express our emotions and really
yeah,
express our
yeah.
emotions.
And I think that's happening with
Mhm.
even the ones they call millennials, which would be a little bit older than you, but it's like it takes people of because I'm like a Gen Xer, and
Okay.
it takes us it took us a little longer. I'm at the
Mhm.
point now, like I told you, I left mine
Mhm.
because I and so I'm going back into my creative projects. I have a whole list of things I need to do, and doing the podcast is something that had been on the back burner because I had a day job. I just sat down with a bunch of friends the night before, kind of like a goodbye dinner, just to find out that half of them are doing the same thing. It
Mm,
took us a little longer to get to the
the
same point where you
shift.
are.
Wow.
It is a shift. And I think
It's a
COVID
shift,
and
yeah.
being home, it shifted so many of us. And a lot of people are like, why am I doing this?
Right. Gotta find your
And
purpose.
yeah,
You gotta find your purpose and path. And that's I've been very fortunate to kind of like know this for a long time. It's not
mm,
easy. And
mm,
working a day job for so long is not easy. That's why I salute I like
mm,
me personally the Kurt creative is like dedicating 17 years to a a corporation or entity or a job. That for me is like, I'm like, that could have been 17 years of me. Like, I don't like that's just how I feel on it. And it's like, I think technically I've been training for 17 years now. I think it's
mm,
about to hit 17 years. But it's like I've always been blessed to have family members that have supported me, and I've just been
mm.
fortunate to have the right people around me to kind of like, hey, here's a job, here's a freelance gig. So like I've been very fortunate.
And I think it's more of an entrepreneurial spirit too,
Mm,
particularly now. Some people call it a gig economy, where you get your jobs or your contract or stuff like
mhm,
that. But things are there's a dynamic, there's a shift. And so that's why I think it just took people of my generation and people even older, it took us a little longer to finally say, yeah, we're trying to go towards this, which is what our parents were able to do because it was a different time,
Mm,
different opportunity. It made sense for them
right.
because it didn't allow us to do. But I just find that the younger, some of the younger guys that I work with in terms of dealing with film and video and getting their companies off the ground, they're right there with you. They're already looking at being an entrepreneur.
Okay.
They're not looking at going and working. Or if they do, I have a friend in New York, he does it, but he's a freelancer. So
Okay.
technically he could choose if he wants to work for ABC here, do this story, or go to NBC and do this.
Gotcha.
He's a freelancer. He's not actually going in every day 9 to 5, sitting at
Right.
ABC desk working on everything that they give him. He gets to
Mm-hmm.
choose, and then when he needs to, he can go and work on a film.
Right.
Um,
That
and so
freedom.
there you go. You
The freedom,
know,
the freedom, the choice,
freedom,
decisions.
freedom.
Yeah.
But that's why I mentioned the code switching, because I think when you look at somebody like a Bruce Wayne,
Mm-hmm.
he literally is the establishment, and then
Yes,
he's
he
the
is.
vigilante.
Yes, he is. Yep.
And so, but when you're talking about coming from your perspective and our perspective, we already have that natural code switching that we have to do. And so I think looking at that and looking at what do you call it? You don't call them superheroes. What do you call them?
In my world, I don't have superpower people. There are no superpower people.
It's all through technology and skill
It's all
and stuff like that.
technology. I guess if I didn't want to,
Don't give anything
spoil.
away,
I'm not gonna
man.
spoil anything. But Land of the Wolves is a series where we just have. I think when I did it, I wanted to just have a post-apocalyptic world where
Mhm.
people have magical
Okay, I was
abilities.
gonna say like magic. Yeah.
Where there's just where you have magic, but in the Eve of Insurrection, we're just focusing on the robots, the
Mhm,
technology, and a lot of like a lot of ideologies. There's some religious aspects that'll pop in here and there.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
so those type of elements.
Now that you mentioned, I can really feel the inspiration of Blade Runner, the setting,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
you
Just
know, and stuff
a
like
just a set.
particularly what you're doing with the corporations and
Yes.
and things like that. But I also found it interesting when you talked about the inspiration from the Black women and also having them as your characters and the different sides and the different things that they represent. Like you said in Land of the Wolves, your character is mixed, but the
Right.
story's not about that.
About that.
And when you were talking, it's like, okay, that makes sense because I think sometimes even with the books that I write, my characters are Black,
Hmm.
but the story's about the larger story that's going on. Them being Black adds ingredients to the story, the environment that they're in, the situation, the things like you talked about, the code switching, the
Hmm.
representation and stuff like that. But the story isn't about that. That's just all part of the mix that gives it flavor and sets it over here as opposed to over here. And I think sometimes in our society, some people are afraid to say like they like to read a Black author because they like to see what their perspective is on things. They just say, I just want a good story. Well, everybody wants a good story.
Exactly.
But what's wrong with saying, okay, but I would also like, if you read Octavia Butler, she has an interesting take on vampires as opposed to the standard take. So it's like, what's wrong with saying that, oh, I'm gonna read, because if you like animation, you watch a particular type of animation, or you go and watch a particular type of movie that has the martial arts and stuff in it, you're going in it for that flavor.
Oh
You want to
yes.
see
I want the action. I want that. I want to see some nice kicks. That's what I came here
yeah,
for.
having a good story and action is just there.
Exactly.
And so, I was going to ask you what you felt about that, or if you run into that, because I guess that's one thing we haven't talked about is what has been your experience once you realized there was this world of Black creators and Black artists and things like that. What has been your experience before and after finding that?
Um, well, to tailor kind of more so to what you were saying with like telling stories that like have to be about a Black experience. Like I feel like I'm always like I feel like I was always a little nervous about like whether or not I was like how certain people going to interpret my stories.
Mhm,
Like for instance, when I originally wrote The Eve of Insurrection, this first issue, I had a dilemma of like, do I want the Eve Syndicate? Do I want them to battle against corporations or another gang? And I was thinking about it in a black and white duality. Because I look at looking at or us versus you can also say it's us versus establishment, but looking at that or looking at an experience between two gangs, and what does that say? And are people going? How are people going? Are people going to say, "Oh, you're just showing black on black violence, like that, black crime," like thinking about that, and then I was like, but do I want to like, or like, what's important to my story, and like, how's this going to pay off at the end? And I was like, I'm gonna tell the specific story I want to tell. I want to show this specific conflict between these two groups, and that's important to me.
Well, and it also goes back to the opening comment that I read from your website. You're taking the familiar and you're putting a spin on it. Well, that's what everybody else do. Okay, so if you take the black on black violence, gang on gang violence, okay, you take that, but then you up it to a galactic empire versus a galactic empire, who have black faces, but they're empires. But
That's
it's the
true.
same.
That's very true. Good point, DT.
So, but I see what you're saying. I think that's what you like. That's basically what you just said. You acknowledge that, but then you put it in a different setting. Right. It's in a different world. It's the same basic conflict, group against group, and they might even have the same color. But like I said, when people read your book, they're going to see that this is a different environment, different groups of people come in a different thing. At base, it's the same, might be the same thing, but it has all that coloring, that flavor, and that world building that goes around it.
But, and then I guess like, and also looking at kind of my experience was just like going to Schaumburg and like seeing just over the past it's been 5 years. Over the past 5 years, looking at how every black creator has their own story they're telling. Some very much feel like we're going to capitalize on the black thing, like we're gonna do something very specific or very mainstream of things. We'll take like for instance, just like doing like avoiding talking about like other African religions, but focusing on Egypt, or like that's a whole thing in itself, and I can get into, but like that's a thing. Or making a story that just focuses on police brutality, or this like these things become, in my opinion, they've always felt like hot button topics that easily connect with people. And I feel like we can tell those stories, but it's also important that we tell different stories that deviate from that, because it's important that like black people I don't want us to like perpetuate the same narratives that like that have been programmed into us by the society, by the white society that we live in. So I feel like it's important we show alternative perspectives. We show black people with superpowers, black people in space. We have black people as gods, showing, and that's another thing that we're starting to see more as representations of African gods. And so I'm on the side of, I'm starting to find myself like I want to do everything. Like I want to ground everything in some realism and capture the racism, but we still have to push forward and show young black people like, hey, there are different ways to exist, and like you can be different, and it's okay.
Cool, very cool. Well, we've been going for an hour. Well, let me do this. I always ask this question: what advice would you give to somebody who was in your shoes? They might be in a middle school or high school. What advice would you give to that young creative person?
I feel like I have two things. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. You're going to make them. It's okay. And be compassionate with yourself. Be honest. Be open with yourself, and just kind of learn and take in everything.
Okay. How do we keep up with all things Jordan Jackson?
You can follow me on Instagram at jpjacksonart, or you can go to my website jpjacksonart.com.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for your time and doing this interview. I really appreciate it. Really giving me some insights on you. And we'll be working on some things ourselves together
Right.
in the future. But I look forward to the next issue of the Insurrection.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
For it. All right. Well, thank you, man.
Awesome. All right. You have a good day.
All right. You too.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Urban Guru podcast. And of course, you can always find us on iTunes. Just search for Urban Guru and you'll find our podcast listed. You can also listen to this podcast on SoundCloud. Just search for Urban Guru Podcast and you'll be able to find it there too. Thank you again for listening. And remember, no matter whatever your creative endeavor is, always push forward, because every step that you take along that path will lead you to your ultimate destination. So I'll see you next time.